The bicycle pedestrian. I jumped the gun there. Call to order the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee for September 21st. We have a quorum. Everybody's fine with the agenda? Any issues? Approval of the agenda? Okay, I got nods. We need a vote to or motion approval of minutes for July 20th.
So I'll abstain as I wasn't present, but I thanked I thanked Mike for providing such good minutes. So it really helped bring me up to speed. Thank you again, Mike.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'll make
Is there a motion? Thank you, RJ. Second.
I second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. I gotta do it this way. RJ,
Aye.
Michelle,
Aye.
John.
You're muted, John.
He's trying to figure it. He's working on it.
Okay.
No.
Okay, I wasn't present in the meeting, so do I still vote on approving the
Oh.
minutes?
No, you can abstain. Jeff,
Abstain then.
you there? No. Who else? Is there anybody else? One, two. And I vote yes. Did I miss anybody? Okay. Update from Nantucket. I think we have Michael here. Just set this up, Michael.
Yes.
This is just hi there. This is the overview of what you learned, how it went so far.
Yes, I would say it was. What's that?
Go ahead. There must be a delay. Go ahead.
Okay, sounds good. I was hugely excited with it. I think it was absolutely a successful proof of concept. I had a blast doing it, and it seems like it was really well received by the community, both tourists and locals alike, and fellow bikers and vehicles as well. It really seemed to be a great amenity for the town. One thing that I learned, which was a bit of a surprise, was how helpful it was for people with mobility issues. Ended up being used. We were booked out for the Boston Pops primarily for that purpose, and pretty much every day that would be a good chunk of our time. So it was, all in all, though, an awesome experience, and we'll hopefully be able to continue it down the line.
So, Michael, what went really
Also,
well?
take any questions.
So I was just going to ask you two things. What went really well, and what did you not expect? Some things that happened, whether it's good or bad, or what were you surprised about specifically?
So I guess what went really well was I was just, I guess, to your surprise question first, I was surprised at how well received it was. Across the 10-month process to get the licensing, there's obviously a bit of controversy, as we all saw. So I was kind of nervous that there'd be a bit more local pushback, but it was a pretty pleasant surprise to see how warm and receptive people were to Nantucket. It was really effective, especially heading toward jetties from town. That road was great to operate on throughout town in general. It's pretty slow moving traffic, and the tuk-tuk's really agile. So, I mean, it was really, I feel like Nantucket is the perfect setting for pedicabs. It's, a reasonable amount of pedicabs. But it's just definitely helped with the flow of traffic. It was fun to see how it was incentivizing people away from driving into town. It was just, it seemed really positive. Would also, on a side note, be really eager to get any of you on board the tuk-tuk just for a little test drive so that you could see for yourself, because I'm really confident that if anyone hops on, they'll be, quite welcome or form toward.
Michael, what didn't work and what would you like to change?
So what didn't I mean, I would like to change the gratuity-based regulation first and foremost. And I do like the structure of how having the payment be gratuity-based. It makes it inclusive for everyone. And then people just kind of pay what they like. But I don't like how it's a regulation. You know, there's like a drunk 21-year-old. I hate just kind of thrusting that they'll pay me what's fair. So I would like to keep with the gratuity base and just telling people pay what they think is fair, but situationally I'd like to be able to charge. So I'd like to do away with that regulation. Furthermore, I think I'd like to get 4 pedicabs for next season, so 2 additional. As at that point, I think it could, you know, actually be a viable business. And sorry, let me quickly look through my note. Oh, and then also I would like to be able to operate on any street that's 30 miles an hour or less. So just, you know, expanding the service area a bit there.
Thank you. Any questions for Michael?
Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Jason. So, Michael, how many rides in total did you provide?
So we're taking rough numbers. First started operating on July 20th, and the license expired, hopefully temporarily, yesterday. And then it fluctuated heavily, but between the 2 pedicabs, and I'm looking through the notes now as I'm saying this because I don't have off the top of my head our total amount, but I can quickly gather this. But some hundreds.
Maybe you could send us that
If
information, send it
not-
to Mike, and then maybe Mike could send us out. You don't have to tell us
Yes,
how
yeah,
much
I'd be
money
happy
made,
to.
but any data you have would be great, just to kind of, you know, we didn't do it, we don't understand it, so how many trips, and if you can even estimate of how many you think were in this area, where was your general, like, where was the biggest demand? You know, like on a map, or maybe you could just put out in a document. That'd be helpful for everybody to see.
Yeah,
I would
exactly.
love to do that, and I already have quite a bit of data collected, and I'll just organize it and make it a bit more presentable, and then be happy to share that with all of you.
Great.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Absolutely. But to generally answer your question, some hundreds, if not 1,000.
Great.
Anybody else? RJ, Michelle, anyone? Comments, thoughts? Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add? Pedicab or thoughts for us?
Yeah, just that the select board chair and vice chair will be requesting of this group to make comments on what Michael Gromley had mentioned about expansion of services. That was something I was made aware of earlier this week, and as I mentioned to you, either we could set up a special meeting or wait till the October meeting to talk about the expansion of services. I think the extension of the season, Michael's handling that through the town administration and the select board office, so we won't need to talk about the season being extended, just the expansion of the services that you provided this last year. So that's for a future meeting, and it doesn't seem like it's time sensitive necessarily, but we'll try to get that between now and or in October perhaps.
Yeah.
Great, if we have the data beforehand, that'll be helpful too. Ian?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Exactly. The more data would be, as much as possible, Michael, would be very helpful. Thank you.
Hey, Michael, don't be afraid to also
Yes.
put in some anecdotal situations in there. So for like those with a disability, it was very helpful. You know, after 11 o'clock at night, it wasn't worth it. I'm just making that up, but like some different things that you noticed some patterns on, I think would be helpful for us for our education.
I'd be happy to compile as much information data as I can and send that over to all of you. Per the point of the expansion, I know that this isn't the meeting to discuss it, but just wondering if anyone has any thoughts that immediately come to mind in regard to that.
I'd like to table that to another time. I want to give us time to talk about the e-bikes and the projects. And, if anyone wants to reach out one-on-one to you, Michael, they can. You and I have done that before. And then we can also, and we'll dig into it in October.
Sounds good. All right. So please, no one hesitate to reach out. And also just a quick clarification. So right now the license isn't in operation, but if someone wanted to go for a ride on the tuk-tuk without paying me, would that be allowed? For example, someone on this board, if they wanted to test it out, is that permitted or no?
I think it gets tricky. Like, it's probably fine. Technically, you're not running the service. But then someone's going to see you and say, "Oh, that's not blah 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 blah." I think he's might be setting it up. Mike, what do you think?
I mean, I would just wouldn't want to be rude, and I would just give a little something for the effort, like you're structured right now, just a little bit of gratuity. I would
Okay.
like to experience it. Honestly, I haven't carved out the time to take advantage of the offer, so I'd be happy to take advantage of the offer. But you should also know that I'm going to give you some gratuity for that, just to be in line with the payment, and just I think it's just proper to do it that way, and not take advantage of your time.
So, Mike, you don't think it's a big deal that it's outside the
I mean, if you want to get down to
timeframe?
the legality of it, I mean, it probably doesn't fall within some kind of expensive gift or anything like this, over $50 or anything like that. No alarms are going off other than that, which it does seem like it falls within that. And I would just give gratuity. I mean, I don't think there's any harm of that, and I would appreciate the experience.
Well, Ian, I would love to get in that ride and talk about conservation issues. Want to do it?
Absolutely. Oh, my goodness. I'm looking forward to it, Jason. It never comes up otherwise.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Gormley. That was, I did run into him out by Highline one night, and we had a great conversation. It looked good. It was clean. It made me want to ride it if I would have had that opportunity. So maybe I'll take you up on that this weekend, Michael.
All right. Well, fingers crossed. I would love to take you and anyone else on the board for a spin. All right.
Alexis?
Well, thank you very much, and I'll compile the data and information for everyone and get that to you as soon as possible.
All right, Michael, we have a hand up. Alexis?
Yeah, sorry, there's no chat, so I just might need to log out and log back in. My Zoom isn't working very well.
Okay, and actually, if I may, Jason, so Michael, give us your contact information through Mike Burns, please.
Yes. I'm sorry, just to clarify, would you like me to?
Yeah.
I could just, I can get your email now, so I'll just send you an email today, Mr. Golding.
Sure.
I was late for a meeting.
Alrighty. So I'll reach out to you today, Mr. Golding, and then I'll have the data to everyone later today.
Yeah, no, I was thinking more of a ride, maybe the weekend.
Oh,
Take
absolutely.
up on his offer.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
If it's okay, then it's me.
All right.
I think there was a delay on Michael. Is there a delay on mine as well, or was it just Michael's?
It's a little bit of a hiccup, but I think we're maybe beyond.
Is it on my end?
I don't think so.
I'm not sure.
Okay, all right,
I can hear you just fine, Jason.
okay. Well, we're on to e-bike safety discussion. And we have, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to preface it by saying that we added this item to the agenda because it's a hot topic this past summer. It was discussed at the select board among some members, and so this is just for general discussion. We're good enough to have mass bike representatives were good enough to join this on this meeting to maybe answer any questions, but the idea was just to have a brief general discussion of topics that we may want to identify issues that we, anything for town meeting, anything like this that we might want to spearhead and recommend.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to introduce Galen Mook. Galen, you and I have talked on the phone over the years. It's nice to finally see you face to face.
Likewise, Jason, glad to be here.
So I think we could start off just I don't know how much you know is I'm sure we're not the only community that e-bikes and e-scooters are just exploded and everyone's trying to figure out how to make it more safe. This last year we had a valiant effort from a community member that tried to warn an article that tried to enforce it, control it, ban it in some areas, and it was just too, we felt it was too convoluted and not practical. And so we're trying to figure out how to maybe do spot enforcing and educate and kind of change the culture, among other things. I mean, thought you had probably could give us some more advice, and some other towns have probably done some great things that we could replicate or adapt.
Yeah, thanks. I'll jump in and first, I really appreciate the attendance and the work that you're doing out there in Nantucket. So please, there's lots of issues, and I'm glad that you're reaching out to Mass Bike on some of the bigger picture stuff. But you're doing the good work and the hard work. So I'm almost going to lean on you on some of these conversations to see what are you experiencing out there. And yeah, I am doing a little bit of a road show these days of basically meeting with the municipal bike ped groups, because everybody's tackling this issue now that e-bikes are, they're legal. And so now it's appropriate to start talking about how we can start to incentivize and regulate them. And I think you had a really good tag there of education. So I'll kind of preface this whole thing by saying, my goal in this is to get some like-minded communications out to people to get more riders out, but then to get them riding more safely. And it does come down to how they're used more so than necessarily what the devices are. Would it help if I went through a little bit of kind of the history of the e-bike legislation and the definition stuff that we've been doing?
Yes, that'd be very helpful.
Cool. I'm just going to make sure I plug in. Sometimes my Bluetooth disconnects, so give me 2 seconds here. All right, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Cool. So I've been at this role about 5 years now, and I'm sure you're all familiar with Mass Bike. We do the statewide work, which is kind of an impossible task, but one of the biggest things that we've been focusing on since I really took the helm was to get e-bikes both defined, properly regulated, and then incentivized. Before last year, there was no definition of e-bikes, and this is a problem currently with scooters, one wheels, electric skateboards, etc. They don't actually exist in mass statute, so there's no clear guidance on how a police officer is to handle this, or how an RMV is to handle this, etc. So we work diligently at Mass Bike to get the state to adopt the standard 3-class model of e-bikes, which has been adopted by the feds on a consumer protection level since, I want to say, like 2007. It's in practice in the manufacturers. It's the type of bikes you get pretty much from the Treks and the Specializeds of the world who are doing US distribution. They follow a 3-class model. The 3 classes are class 1. When you're pedaling, there's a motor that can kick on, but once you hit 20 miles an hour, it's got a speed regulator and the motor will shut off. You can still keep pedaling, but the motor does not assist beyond 20 miles an hour. Class 2, there's a throttle. So it could be pedal assist or throttle based, but you don't necessarily have to be pedaling. And it's almost like a scooter, but it is still treated as a bicycle because it's 2 wheels, a full operated pedal system, and a seat. So it's a bike by definition. But the difference between 1 and 2 in terms of classes is 2, you can have a little bit of a throttle button to get the motor to go. And that also kicks out 20 miles an hour, the motor stops. And then there's the class 3 model, which is a pedal assist only. So you have to be pedaling for the motor, and that gets you up to 28 miles an hour, and then the motor will cut off. And the reason that they did that classification system, arguably from the federal level, was because the bike industry was really pursuing it. It was kind of an industry pushed classification system, and nobody was really saying boo to it. This was, around 2007, 2008, before e-bikes were really a hot thing. And that kind of got set into how these things were built, manufactured, sold, and purchased. In this state, in Massachusetts, we successfully were able to get class 1s and class 2s in statute through the transportation bond bill last year. We do not have class 3s in Mass statute. Now, what does that really mean? Practically, not really much, because you can still go to your local Trek dealer and buy a class 3 e-bike, but it does create a gray area for enforcement and regulation. If your officers, for instance, wanted to prohibit a class 3, there's no real state definition that you can point to say class 3 is prohibited on the bikeway. So that's a little bit of a hiccup, and I want to flag that because that's something that we're trying to rectify. We have a bill out in the Senate. Not hopeful it's going to get through this session because the House lead on the Transportation Committee just does not think 28 miles an hour is appropriate and doesn't want them to be classified as bicycles or have the same rights and responsibilities as bicycle operators. So it's a political conversation in most sense of where class 3s lie. But what I'm finding is that most of municipal jurisdictions that are thinking about regulations were comfortable with class 1s and class 2s to the extent of allowing them to be wherever bicycles are allowed. And class 3s really only should be on the roadways. And so that's kind of where we've landed in the interim in this gray area. It's like, we don't really talk about them because we don't really want them to be around. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll take a quick pause there because I know it's a little bit more complex than I'm making it out to be.
I've got a quick question on, is there any talk at all of having a class 3s go through the RMV and having a small license plate? And so if it's abused or was not behaving properly, that's taken away. I know that's a lot of red tape to probably put that in place.
Yeah, we've talked to the RMV and they have no appetite in that. They did, before this classification was put into statute, the RMV did have a policy or regulation through the department that said if you converted a bicycle to be an electric bicycle, as long as it was 20 miles an hour or less, which is basically a class 1 or class 2, then it would not be considered a motorized bicycle. It would be considered an electric bicycle and not pursuant to any RMV regulation. So the RMV in the past has actually taken some forward-thinking stances on this in the shortfall of a statute, but they don't want to tackle anything that goes above 20 miles an hour either, because when it gets beyond the bike category, then it gets into their purview to actually have to regulate and license, and like you were mentioning, track like they do with quote motorized bicycles, mopeds. And I just think the RMV has no capacity to handle that right now. Mopeds are a little bit different. We've had that statute in there, I think, since the 70s or the early 80s. People are very familiar with what mopeds are. They go up to 35 miles an hour. They're gas powered. That is a little bit more of an RMV conversation. But if you get out there and ride a class 3 e-bike, it's a bike. It shifts like a bike. It handles like a bike. It looks like a bike. There's no real way for anybody to look at a class 3 versus a class 2 versus a class 1 and say which was which. So I think that's where the hesitation comes in to even have an agency on its own try to do a regulatory aspect without everybody coming along. Yeah,
makes sense.
Any other?
Yeah,
please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Clayton, I don't mean to interrupt. Jason, whatever.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, leave some room for some questions now.
Well, the bottom line is it crashes like a moped when it's going 28 miles an hour, and the RMV don't want to get off its ass too bad. I think there should be a lot of political pressure to make sure that there is a license plate. And I mean, thank you, Jason, because if I'll add some more comments later. Thank you.
Michelle?
Yeah, that I agree with Ian. I mean, it goes as fast as a moped or a scooter. So I would think that it actually also needs to be registered, and then it would be easier to actually track. In the Netherlands, it's also being handled the same as a moped or a scooter. I do understand like a thing that I was thinking about it, but I understand that that's illegal in Massachusetts, is speed cameras. In the Netherlands, they're using speed cameras that are related to the license plates on the scooters and the level 3 e-bikes. But that would not be a possibility in Massachusetts, I guess. Just a question maybe to Mass Bike, is that something that might be changing in the future as well, or?
Yeah, great question, Michelle. You're opening a can of worms there. We do support speed camera enforcement. We think that it's something that's wise, and we've seen it be effective in mostly major cities around the country, but it's something that we think would be important. But the flip side of that is then licensing these, in the Netherlands are called pedelecs. Essentially, it's the faster e-bike. Until the agency has capacity, I'm hesitant to kind of encourage any sort of licensing of the bikes. So I don't know. I mean, as far as we got with the statute, they have to be labeled with a standard regulatory label, so you know which is which in terms of what class, but that's not assigned to a user or a purchaser or an insurance or anything along those lines. And I'm hesitant to step into that mess, knowing that the RMV can't handle it.
Galen, is there any other states that are handling this issue really well that you're like, oh, if we could do that, that would be nice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the way that they've done it is there's two ways of approaching this. And I think the regulations on speed are the big concerns, because that really is what differentiates the 1 versus the 3. One, it's if you do have class 3s in statute, you can regulate and prohibit. So for instance, we could say class 3s are prohibited on, pathways, obviously would be a first, but it just gives you the flexibility to keep them legally off of places where bicyclists would otherwise go, off of sidewalks, etc. But I also think that the bigger issue isn't necessarily the device itself, but the use. So back to Michelle's point of like a speed camera, it doesn't necessarily track the device. It's when you go above a certain speed are then the enforcement triggers activated. So I'm kind of hoping that we can encourage these conversations, because there are so many different types of devices that are being used, electric scooters, one wheels, skateboards, etc. It's going to be a game of whack-a-mole if we try to define them before we can regulate them. And I'm hoping that we can kind of get to the conversation of regulating speed overall and saying, a pathway speed limit is 15 miles an hour, as an example. Even though the bikes can go 20, can we actually put in some sharper teeth in regulatory agencies around the use of all devices, not one device versus another device? So I think that's kind of where I want to get to this conversation and what we've been seeing. As part of the statute that we were able to get in last year, we also put in a sentence that allows jurisdictions, including municipalities, to put in legal speed limits on bikeways. Prior to that, it was advisory speeds, and they were more or less unenforceable unless a user was to the point of being reckless. But now, if you do so wish, you can post speed limits. I don't necessarily recommend you follow that up with police officer resources and radar detectors, but you could. But at least you can put a speed limit on a multi-use pathway, which is probably the concern here in Nantucket, and maybe even some speed feedback signs or something along those lines, so that you're really encouraging people to self-regulate their speed. And whether they're on a pedal bike, an electric bike, a scooter, or anything that's not really a motorized vehicle, then you would kind of do a catch-all.
Can I maybe comment on that? The only thing that I'm thinking about, it's nice to have a sign on a road that you're not allowed to go faster than 50 miles an hour, but if you're how do you enforce it if you cannot do any speeding cameras, or are we now asking police officers to chase bikers and even with cars and so on? I do agree with the whole education piece, and I actually think there should be on an elementary or intermediate school level, like a curriculum like a traffic safety curriculum developed or something like that, so that you really get it from a younger age. But it should be like a whole package. So like, yeah, there should be an education piece, but there should also be still like an enforcement piece. And I think in this case with traffic, it's just, in my mind, like the best way to do that is like with like a speed camera kind of system. Otherwise, I just would find it a little difficult to really, the enforcement piece of it is just a little difficult. If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
no, it does. I'm happy to respond, or also see another hand up too. I'm happy to kind of keep this open and then I can jump in afterwards.
Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just ask if these aren't class 3s or e-bikes or something like that, can't be if there's confusion about the regulation, if there's age limits being discussed as part of this at the state level rather than the. I mean, I think it's great to have the classifications, but it seems like a lot of the concerns were younger users using the e-bikes, and I mean, there's a lots of regulations about 15 years old, 16 years old across the country about using mopeds and motorized vehicles that go above 20 miles an hour, and that being the kind of the trigger. That would be the direction I think I would feel comfortable with, is just going with an age restriction of like 16 or older for e-bike use across the board, just so you don't confuse the classifications and try to police. What does the sticker say? Does it say class 2, 1, or 3, that kind of a thing? I don't know if that gets muddied with the scooters, those blade motorized vehicles and other micromobility devices that maybe younger people may want to use, but that would be the direction I'd go, with just age restrictions. But didn't know if that was discussed at all.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in. Yeah, thanks, Jason. I appreciate you fielding these. Michelle, I'll get to your point in a second, because I think you're hitting a very big topic too, of the education components and the levers of influence that we have. But Mike, to your point about age restrictions, the way the statute was built for the class 1s and 2s, we don't have age built into it, but the language that we were drafting for the class 3s would require the user to have a driver's license, mainly because they would be potentially able to go faster than the speed limit on some roadways. So that was the catch, to make sure that we were hitting a certain age group. And I believe, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe they would be required to wear a helmet as well, which is not the case for 1s and 2s if they're over the age of 16. So that's kind of where we landed a little bit in the controls of, if we were to go for the faster classification to follow the federal guidelines, we have a little bit more incentive to put some hooks in there around who can use and how they can be used. I should also clarify that, like, whether or not we get class 3s, I'm not hopeful we will this session or not. But I'm thinking of it as a federal, a Beacon Hill conversation. I'm not saying that this can't be done on a municipal level as well. And I know that there's always been some tension between what can be done municipally versus what can be done on a state level. And that's a tension that you feel, obviously, because you're both a municipality and a whole island, literally. So what is state purview versus what is local purview? If you were thinking about drafting something that would maybe allow for, for a device or whatever hooks to it, I'd be interested to kind of pursue that as well. And we've seen, before we got the statute in for class 1s and 2s, City of Salem, for instance, was trying to do it on their own. We saw e-bikes out in bike share systems in the Pioneer Valley, and they were bucking the trend of not waiting for Beacon Hill to act. So I also encourage us to kind of put some brain power behind it if we did want to act as a municipality. I can jump into Michelle's point in a second of education. I do think that's also a broader topic, because
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I 100% agree with the power of education, and I think that's the better we do at education will mitigate the need for enforcement, ideally. There's this concept of the certain ease of bike advocacy, engineering, evaluation, equity, encouragement. There's a bunch of E's. One of the E's is enforcement. And actually, what we've been doing at our work at MassBike is trying to do the work to get away from enforcement. And what we're seeing is that the use of resources to do enforcement doesn't really pay off and return on investment. If we're going to be sending one officer out to do one interaction, it's not feasible. So we want to do things like do better engineering, so that we design roadways and pathways that prevent people from even getting to the point being dangerous. And then education, of course, is, in my opinion, the cheapest and most immediate way to handle things. You talked about elementary and primary school and middle school education. There's a Safe Routes to Schools program, which has now been extended to high school. So there's a way that you can request Safe Routes to Schools education. And I actually think that's more powerful to hit the 14, 15, and 16-year-olds who are going out and, thinking about what mode they're going to be using. So that's a hook there. Also to think about education in terms of adults, because you have a lot of tourists who come in, who knows what background they have. So finding the hooks that you can educate, maybe it's a flyer that they get on the ferry that talks about some safe riding, that maybe has the e-bike definition, and say, hey, if you're bringing an e-bike to Nantucket, just know it's 12 miles an hour on the pathways and 15 miles an hour on the roads, or something along those lines, whatever you come up with. But there are hooks there. Signage, of course, on the roadways, the flashing signs. I think the speed feedback is probably my favorite way of doing it, because people in real time can be told what their behavior is. And we see that paying off. You don't need an officer and a cruiser and a radar detector anymore. You just put a speed feedback sign, and that gets the same desired effect of slowing people down. And then also, there's hooks that we've seen other municipalities do. In Boston, we were able to with the excise tax, which goes out to everybody who's got a car. We send them a little flyer that says, hey, you drive. Here's some considerations around driving safer around people biking. And by the way, if you want to think about leaving your car at home, here's an e-bike, here's some ways of doing e-bike. So again, it's kind of like an education for use, but also an education to promote use of. So kind of keeping that in mind. And, that's obviously a brainstorm that we could dive deep into in a future meeting. But I think that's where I found the most effective communication tools to be. Getting it in the press, when we do bike month events, making them focused around the issues that we're seeing out there. And if like the big issue you want to tackle is slow down e-bikers on our pathway, we'll just do a bunch of events geared towards that and kind of mimic some of the language. And we do have a coordinated communication strategy behind it. So that's a lot to throw in there. But again, I think you really opened up the door there when you mentioning education. In my opinion, it's like, what can this committee do? You can probably get a letter on the excise tax. You can probably get a letter on the ferry. Things along those lines where you have some levers of influence, because it's going to be hard for you to ask your police chief to say, hey, we need some more detail out there to get that, that one kid who goes too fast on the bikeway. How else can we really make that messaging happen?
Thank you, Galen. Ian, then RJ.
Thank you, Jason. So thank you, Galen. This is really very instructive. And I personally would disagree with Michelle about putting speed limits on the bike path. I think that they're self-reinforcing. Plus your idea of having, the speed limits that also tell you how much faster you're going, I think is a great help. But when it comes to education, I had a conversation with a local doctor last week because I met somebody a few weeks ago who was hit by a Jeep on a bike path that the Jeep had just pulled over on, and he couldn't get out of the way. And at the emergency room, he was told there were 2 to 3 accident victims came into the emergency room every day of the week. And I was a bit surprised. So when I asked the local doctor if that was true, he said, absolutely. So he's saying, in other words, over 3 months, 90 days, we have up to 300 people are in the emergency ward. For a number of years, we've been trying to get statistics about where people are injured on bicycles to see if there are hotspots. We've gone absolutely nowhere. I don't know if there are legal ramifications you might be able to advise us on, but he said, he said it's an absolute shit show, basically. And he said, go down to the school, right? And we have our middle school, elementary, and high school all, within spitting distance of each other. And he said, you just cannot believe how fast these kids are coming in on scooters, on e-bikes, none of them wearing helmets. And I was really shocked, to hear him speak on that issue. So, I'm really pleased that we're having this conversation. I'm so pleased that you're attending this to help us actually get another dimension and handle.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Can I add something to this?
Sure.
Because I mean, I work for the school, and yes, that's definitely an issue that kids are driving around way too fast on a lot of those e-bikes. When I saw this on the agenda, and every time I see something about e-bikes this, e-bikes that, I do find it a little, yes, it's an issue, but it's one of the many issues in traffic. I walk around the island a lot, and the amount of times that cars either don't want to stop for me in the crosswalk, or yeah, that I kind of feel intimidated because they're really close, or there's no sidewalk, so I kind of have to walk in the grass, or like, you know, they're in my mind, there's so many more issues with cars than with e-bikes that this in general, I find the conversation on safety around e-bikes a little too much, in a sense that nobody really talks about cars. There's so many accidents about cars, like nobody wants to really, there's no emergency for regulating it or anything like that. But for these e-bikes, because it's something new, and of course it's also related to our students, but I mean, so are car accidents. It just, I don't know, I sometimes find it a little difficult that it's, again, about e-bikes, and yes, it needs to be regulated, but I wish it was sometimes a little bit as well about like the size of cars. For example, they get bigger and bigger. Sometimes I cross a road and cars are taller than I am. I'm 6'3". It doesn't happen that often that cars are actually taller than I am. It's just, I don't know, it's just something I guess I wanted to vent.
May I just add 10 seconds, Jason? RJ, do you mind? So my point, Michelle, about the lack of an accident database for bicycles. There is a complete database for car accidents. There's a complete database for Lyme disease. It's insane that we don't have a database for bicycle accidents. That was my point. So I wasn't trying to single out e-bikes in that comment, but thank you, Jason. Thank you, RJ.
Yeah, I'll do a quick response, Jason, if you don't mind, just to thank you both and agree with you both. Ian, we have in statute a requirement for the DOT to, on a state level actually, to build a database of vulnerable user crashes. It's in process. It was part of the law that just got signed in earlier this year. It should be rolled out at the end of next year. So I agree with you with the frustration. The data sucks all across the state. We have no idea what's really going on. So the requirement is in process. MassBike is providing feedback on the forums. It's going to be in every police department once it rolls out. And so we'll actually have a vulnerable user database that we can look at. Right now, just for everybody's edification, it's only if property damage is $100 or above, as assigned by a police officer, that does any of this get tracked. So, if somebody's knocked off their bike and they just shake it off and the police officer says, "Oh, you're fine, go home," that never gets tracked. Now it will start to get tracked. It's just going to take a couple of years to get into it. So have patience. And Michelle, to your point too, I 100% agree. I think the focus on the dangers out there, the real dangers are automobiles. I 100% agree. And you can ask any police chief, you're like, "So are you seeing an uptick in e-bike crashes?" They're like, "No, we're expecting it, but we're not seeing anything right now." And if you look at, obviously, the crash data over COVID was speeding crashes, more fatal crashes, more serious crashes were due to automobile use. So I thank you for bringing that up. The real elephant in the room of the dangers out there is the things that can cause the most amount of damage, which to that point, we have new designation in Mass statute of vulnerable users on our roadways. So hopefully we can change the culture of who is more protected, who deserves different types of regulations on our roadways. You as a vulnerable road user can have special determination based off this new statute. We can start to build laws, we can start to build signage, some messaging around how motorists need to be the ones who are providing space. So it's no longer share the road, it's motorists must give space. And that's a reframing of the culture, which, I mean, I've been in the state a little more than 20 years. I think we're at the start of that conversation right now. So bear with us, but yeah, I think your point is very well taken by MassBike.
Thank you, Galen. RJ.
Thank you, Jason. First, just like to thank Galen and Alexis for joining us and for taking on this task. It's whack-a-mole indeed. It reminds me of the forever chemicals, the PFAS issue, where we try to regulate one and turn around and there's a brand new one someone invented that we have to deal with. So it's likely going to take a long time before we come to some sort of conclusion on how to actually properly regulate these. I still think, like some of you said earlier, it should be based on speed and leave it at that so that we don't have to keep up with every new model. But on the other side of the coin, as a cyclist who is using these bike paths almost daily, some of the close calls I've had with e-bikes coming in the other direction have been around bends, and it makes me think about how these bike paths were designed and how they weren't designed for the speeds that e-bikes are traveling. You can't hear the e-bikes coming. Luckily, I haven't had a head-on collision, but it makes me think and wonder, should this be something we bring up to the folks at DPW who trim back vegetation around some of these bends and things like that? I don't want to encourage people to go fast, but it'd also be nice to know and have that extra second around a bend to know that, oh crap, okay, someone's coming in the direction and they're going very fast, because that's not what these bike paths, which were put in before we had all these e-bikes and all these classifications, it's not what they were designed for. So it's something I think we can do, or at least ask about in the short term while we figure out how to regulate them, to hopefully avoid some of these collisions that have happened. Thank you.
Thanks, RJ. Well, Ian, you must be jumping for joy knowing that legislation has passed and it's going to be implemented in the next couple of years for the data. I mean, that's a game changer. Like, once the police get that into their systems, we'll have that data.
You know, I am, Jason, and it's wonderful news. Thank you, Galen, and all the work it must have entailed. But the doctor I was talking to has tried for 3 years to get data from MGH here, from the hospital, and has been unable to get data from the hospital. I mean, unbelievably, as you know, how many bike accidents come in. And is that something that your bill is also addressing, so that hospitals will have to provide the same, you know, obviously stripped of personal data, but the same level of reporterage?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's mostly going to be limited towards EMS response and police reports. When you get to the hospital level, the HIPAA firewall is so strong that getting any information once they're actually admitted is going to be really tough. So this is beyond me. We advocated for the bill to get pushed through, and then we've kind of given it to the Department of Public Health, the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, and the DOT to figure out. And that's the conversation that's happening right now between those three departments. So I don't have a firm answer, but my hunch is hospital data is the hardest to get, mainly because of the HIPAA firewall.
Right, seems to be. Yeah, okay, thank you.
And you're not alone there. I mean, we spent years, I would say, I don't know, at least 5 years or more trying to get data from the Boston Police Department years ago of just incidents. Other municipalities do this wonderfully. I always point to the city of Cambridge unfairly in a lot of these conversations, but they post all of their vulnerable crash user data publicly. They have a GIS map where so you can see where even on the block the incident occurred. It'll tell you the time of day, the reason for the incident, the response. So I know that not every municipality, actually no municipalities have the resources that Cambridge has, but they were able to kind of make it a priority for how they're both engaging their police officers and do the reporting, and then how they present that back to the public, which has been amazingly helpful for the advocates.
Yeah, I'm sure it has been. And I'm sure they've identified hotspots and taken precautions accordingly.
That's exactly it. They can change, signal timing. They can add in protected bike lanes. They can, change bus stop locations, whatever it can do to identify major issues. And it's paying off. I think their ridership levels are, probably, Michelle, you'd be surprised. It's probably similar to what's in the Netherlands. And it's a U.S. city in a very dense and old environment.
Yeah, I think I've seen some bike counters as well from Cambridge online, where you can see like some locations where, where you can see the amount of bikes being used on a certain street.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
it's a
you know,
lot.
just because I'm on the tangent of Cambridge, we also do a partnership with the city of Cambridge where we work. Mass Bike is a winner of this grant of this bid, but we help teach every sixth grader on bike education. We go to every middle school for 2 weeks with a fleet of bikes with certified instructors, and we literally every sixth grader gets 2 weeks of bike instruction. They also do this at second grade, they do this at fourth grade, they do this again at eighth grade. But you know, it's a way that they have invested in committing into their public school system this generational change. So that could be something, you know, from a school level. Yeah.
Thank you, Galen. We have another agenda item we got to get to. Is there any other questions or comments for Galen? Matt, I saw you come on. John, anything else?
I was just gonna agree with Ian. My wife got hit 4 or 5 years ago, and I brought her to the hospital. You know, she didn't. You know, she was okay, but they said the same thing. There was 2 or 3 a day at that time. It hasn't changed. Last year, I have a business with 50 employees. I had 3 employees out last year, 1 permanently for the summer because of e-bike accidents. And these are young boys riding bikes that go faster than 36 miles an hour, even, I think. They were really moving, and one of them that got hurt. And so I think it's a huge issue. And, you know, and besides, understand these guys are not wearing a helmet. These kids are not wearing helmets, so they're going to get really hurt. And they don't even know about it out here. They don't even realize, because they're young. They're young boys. They don't know how hurt they're going to get. There was one lady that was on. This is up by the old mill. A box truck went by her. The mirror on the side of the box truck hit her head. She wiped out. They kept driving. This is one of the nurses told this story. They kept driving. That lady, this is right next to the hospital. So the lady got picked up and brought to the hospital, taken off island, and will never be the same. She's basically a vegetable because she was hit in the head with with a side mirror from a box truck. No one's heard about that. You know, the hospital knows about it, like Ian says, but no one is saying, hey, watch out. Vesper Street is the cars are going too fast and it's too dangerous. No one knows. We know that because we drive it, but we don't know that somebody was, had that level of damage. So we've got some work to do still, but thank you.
Thanks, man. Anything else? Mr. Burns?
Can I add one thing? Sorry. It's just,
we have to be quick. We have
no, just like really quick. I walk Vesper Lane every day, and I don't feel comfortable. Cars drive way too fast there. But anyway, so that's yes. Just wanted to vouch for Vesper Lane being dangerous right now.
Okay, Galen, thank you for being here. There's a wealth of information.
Yeah,
these are things we've been talking about for a while, and you shined a light on a lot of them. Thank you for all the work that you're doing, you and your team.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And likewise, flipping it back on you, you're doing the wheels on the ground advocacy. So let's just keep in touch, and please let me know your experiences out there because it'll help better inform how we advocate on a broader scale.
Thank you, Galen. And any of the feedback members ever have any questions, you want to reach out to Galen and their team. They in the years they get back to me pretty quick, and they're very helpful.
Appreciate that. It's kind words.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, cut that off. We could talk with Galen for another hour. We got to get Weston Sampson on here. Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we have Josh and Weston and Sampson to provide the committee with a brief update on the status of options and some other coordination that we've done with the land bank. So I'll hand the baton over to Josh to kind of lead that discussion.
Josh, I can't hear you. Can anybody else hear him? No. You're not muted, but there's something with your audio.
It's that headset.
Oh, no.
Mr. Chair, while Josh is, I guess, maybe playing with the settings there, I'll just touch on a few of the bullet pointed items. First of all, you looked at a boardwalk option through the midpoint of the bike path. That portion of the design was shared with Jesse Bell at the Land Bank. Jesse brought that option to the Land Bank Commission, and the Land Bank did support the option for a boardwalk. So at least the group has support of that. Weston Sampson also, for the end of the path from Old Tom Nevers Road down to the playing fields, they did come up with two additional options for addressing that, which essentially were bike lanes on the edge of the roadway that would stay within the public way and help avoid any bike path or right-of-way impacts. And I'll scroll down to that section here, and I think we have some other alternatives that were included in the packet as well.
Yes. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
There you go. I'll yield to Josh now.
Great, thanks. Sorry about that. I just had to switch a quick setting on my headphones. So yes, thanks Mike for doing that quick introduction. Appreciate the commission for taking some time to chat with us. So we've been updated on the boardwalk. That's excellent news. And then as far as this alternate layout, Mike wanted us to take a look at, because we have concerns with property acquisitions, especially on that east side of the Tom Nevers Road. Sorry, just with how far when we're getting the green buffer between the road and the bike path and the 10-foot bike path, we might be chomping into our neighbors' properties outside of the Tom Nevers Road right of way. So we took a little look at an alternate here, which would be splitting that 10-foot wide bike path into two 5-foot wide lanes. They would be directional. So as you're going down towards the beach, if you're coming down from Milestone Road and you're heading down towards the beach, you'd be hanging out and riding along that west side of the path. And then at some point we would have a switch where we would cross the road and the directions of travel would change, and we would skinny the roads down to a 5-foot wide path. One of the options, or on both options here, so this is actually a perfect slide here. So we took a look at where would be the safest position to add a crossing. Initially, if we look further up the road where we have Old Tom Nevers Road, we are having a crossing on there, but there's a big kind of curve. There's a bend in Tom Nevers Road. So having a crossing there just for sight lines of cars and pedestrians in the middle of the road, we would not recommend crossing there. So we took a look further down as we come out of that curve, and there's a nice long straight section of Tom Nevers Road. So about 270, somewhere kind of around there. As we get into that straight section, we would recommend putting our crossing there. You know, if cars are driving 50 miles an hour, I did a quick calculation, you will travel 73 feet in a second. So somewhere around 270, 300 feet, you have about 3.5 to 4 seconds of visual. As you come around the corner, you can see somebody and you have about 3.5 seconds to kind of make a maneuver, slow down, you know, looking towards the middle of the road. So if somebody's in there and they're coming down, going to the beach, they should have plenty of opportunity to slow down to let the user kind of cross there. We can also talk about flashing signals and crosswalk. We would paint a crosswalk on there, but there's other kind of safety measures that we could implement too. So if somebody's crossing, they can push the button, have the flashing lights. So even that would be another visual indicator if somebody's coming down, hey, there's somebody here, there's the flashing lights. So we looked at this opportunity here. So as you come down the road, you're at your 10-foot wide section, then we would skinny it down and cross the road there. The bike path on the eastern side, so on the left-hand side of the road, we would abut the bike path right next to the roadway. We would recommend curbing that bike path there. I don't think we would recommend having a bike path that is at the same elevation as your vehicular roadway. We would recommend putting a curbing that. And there's various types of curbs. Obviously, the most safest curbing option would be a vertical granite curb. You have the visual difference of a light granite curb color in contrast with your two dark pavements. Plus, a granite curb is very solid. That would provide some protection in case a wandering car comes across those vertical granite curbs. Usually, skip that car's tire back in lane there. This hugs the bike path up against the road, and it's 5 foot wide. This will have the minimal amount of disturbance and land taking on there. Further down towards the end, there is an existing metal wire guardrail that's along this kind of last end of the curb. And there is a height difference between where the road is and that kind of lower kind of grassy, area that's down there. Unfortunately, if we're trying to get a 6-inch wide granite curb and a 5 foot wide paved bike path in there, we are beyond that guardrail. So that guardrail would need to be removed and replaced. So there is a cost associated with that. That is shown here in the red, where we would just move, or we wouldn't move, but we would install a new guardrail along that edge, and that would just prevent pedestrians and bike users of the bike path from kind of going down into that lower portion. On the other side of the pathway, we kept this roadway on the left side, on the west side, up against the road, and we took a look at two options on the eastern side, on the right hand side of the road. One was just to take the existing layout of the 10-foot wide pathway and cut it in half and just make that 5 feet and try to pull as much of the potential land disturbance or property takings away. So it basically follows the same amount of the same layout. It's just 5 feet wide instead of 10 feet. Towards the very, very end, these last two houses, we would still recommend bringing the bike path along the road. I don't know if you can zoom in on those kind of those last few houses down in there, Mike. But some of our neighbors, their driveways are really, really close to the road. So trying to align a 5 foot wide or even a 10 foot wide bike path that has a 10 foot wide vegetation buffer, we're getting really close into our neighbor's house. So for those reasons, once we get past this last utility pole that's circled in red, and we would cross that last driveway, we'd recommend bringing the bike path along the end of the road just for the last couple 100 feet of the road. So that's one of the options there. And then the last option was, let's take a look at just bringing the bike path along the road. So you kind of have the same condition that you have on the west side of the road as you have on the east side. So you basically would have your road, and then you'd have two curbed bike paths on either side of the road. The issue with that is you have a series of utility poles that are marching down that eastern side of the road, and they vary in distance from the edge of the roadway. And there are a few conditions where you do not have a clear 5 foot offset from your edge of pavement to where the utility poles are. So in a couple locations, we might not have the full 5 foot wide bike path. It might be a 4.5 foot wide bike path. There's just some utility kind of corridors. Mike, I'm not exactly sure which page that would be, but we do show kind of a potential connection. It's on 102. Yeah, these two in particular. As you can see now, this is the symbol that the surveyor is using for a utility pole. It's kind of a round circle with like two kind of appendages on the side. It's a symbol, so it's not accurate to ground. Typically utility poles are 8 inches wide. So, but I just wanted to make that clear to the commission here. If this was an option that we would choose, there would be some conditions or some areas where the utility pole is directly or partially in the bike path. That's there. So those were kind of the two studies, and then we just took a quick cost estimate kind of rundown to see what the implications are. You know, with adding vertical granite curb, there's a linear foot cost associated with that, and replacing the guardrail, there's a cost associated with that. Now we are still waiting on the surveyor. Our surveyor is still working on getting all of the properties along the entire road. You know, it's 2.5 miles. There's multiple property owners on there, so the surveyor is still working on getting where all of the exact properties are. So our next step was be to take where does the right of way, where is the right of way of the town's property end, and would any of these potential bike path layouts interfere with property, and would that require the town of Nantucket to do property acquisitions? So that would be the next step, and then we can really kind of take a look at what's the costs and benefits and pros and cons of each of these options. That's where we stand for now. Any questions or comments that I can update or address?
Anyone? Ian? You're muted,
You're
Ian.
muted.
I'll never learn, sorry.
That's all right.
So, will there be pedestrian crossing markings for to make sure that there isn't the plethora of stop signs that, you know, the town has passed an article forbidding them basically with minor roads and private roads. And so the last thing from my perspective, I mean, it's an article that the BPEC signed off on and presented. So on this road, are you planning to have pedestrian crossing markings to show private roads that clearly they have to stop, and then some form of yield or cautionary sign, maybe for the bicyclists? I beg your pardon, not a yield sign, but a cautionary sign for bicyclists, but definitely stop signs for the secondary roads coming in.
Yes, that would be our intention. Some of these kind of neighborhood kind of side roads that lead into some of these neighborhood kind of sections. Yes, we would recommend, and we just haven't shown it here. This is more of a study option, but that would be the intent, would be to put some crossing marks on there. We would put stop signs for the vehicles, and some sort of either cautionary sign for the pedestrians or for the bike paths themselves. I've seen it kind of both ways. On the mainland, on the Cape, I've driven next to a bike path, and there was a bunch of little stop signs for the bikers on the bike paths. But that would be the intent, would be to put some striping down.
Well, thank you. But I would hope that there would be no small stop signs for bicyclists.
Okay.
Because of course they'll go right through them. And in fact, it's not supported by our regulations. But I'm all for a yellow caution sign for bicyclists to be aware of, you know, that they're approaching where cars intersect.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we would definitely defer to the town on the best kind of management that the town has seen for those. So yes, absolutely, we would follow your guys' guidance.
Thank you.
Josh, is your recommendation to have 2 bike paths that are like pretty much like we have a Matticat that's kind of just has a little curve and just kind of flush asphalt right into the road on both sides?
So the safest option in our recommendation would be have vertical granite curbing between the bike path and the vehicular road. That way your bike path is elevated 6 inches above the road plane. The vertical granite curb, like I said, is a lighter gray, so it stands out. So you have that visual cue of there's a difference here. I'm sure we've all have been either along bike paths or sidewalks where you have the typical asphalt berm, Cape Cod berm along a sidewalk. And if it's at night and it's wet, it all looks like a driveway. I mean, we would prefer the vertical granite curb, but there is a cost associated with that. And if we curb this whole thing, you're looking at almost 6,000 linear feet of vertical granite curb on either side of it. There's a more cost-effective cost-effective option, curbing option, which would be a bituminous curb. We would recommend either, I think in either case, we would recommend having new roadway striping along the side of there, another either yellow or white striping, just to help have that visual cue. Then additionally, we could talk about painting the curb if that was something that we needed to add extra belts and suspenders to. But there's just the cost associated with the different types of curbing.
Well, I think BPAC will probably always recommend the most safe. And
Yep.
then have a second recommendation saying like, okay, if for some reason that doesn't pass, whatever, finance committee, select board, then we would say our second would be, I'm just making this up, but Cape Cod berm, and we like to paint that edge so it visually looks different. Both those options are safer than what's there now, but more
Yes.
people will be there on bikes once we build this. So we want to build the most safe thing. I have a feeling that Tom Nevers, HTC in general, won't want to see granite curbing in the middle of the country. That's a very rural area. And so that might not go for that reason. But I think
Yep.
we as BPAC need to say, what do we really want the most safe? And then what's our next best recommendation?
Correct. Yeah, I think, and that there might be a happy medium where, as we look at some certain areas, we could identify maybe some higher risk areas where maybe a vertical granite curb would be more appropriate. For instance, along that curve where we have where the wire guardrail currently exists, that might be a candidate for having vertical granite curb there. And then maybe along the straightaways, we could transition to an asphalt berm, just so keeping in line with the rural nature out there. But in certain areas, if we want to protect or add additional layers of protection for the bike path users, there might be a kind of a happy medium in there. And we'd be happy to explore that and make some recommendations and kind of discuss with Mike.
Everybody's thoughts? Any questions, thoughts?
Mr. Chair, we can bring this back at a future meeting too, when there's more information to share. Josh mentions that the right of way is still being quantified, so we understand what those impacts are. So as soon as this other information is made available, we'll bring this back and share it with you all, and hopefully we can start thinking about public coordination meetings and stuff like this once we have some good options on the table, and we can actually seek a formal recommendation from this group and share that with the public.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Josh.
All right. Appreciate it, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. So Jason, I'm going to have to step off as I have another meeting in a few minutes.
Okay.
So it's good to see you, and perhaps we'll hold hands over the weekend in a pedicab.
Let's do it.
Mike, thank you, and I'll be in touch, and thank you, everybody. And see you soon, I hope. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ian. All right, Mike, we got the complete streets, Mid-Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we have Jeff Maxis from Beta Group to run through some slides that were shared with you all before the meeting, and kind of as a follow-up from what we discussed at the last meeting. So I'll hand it to Jeff to kind of walk through these slides. And I think the intent is to kind of share this information. And if you're not ready yet to make a recommendation to other groups, that can be something we can discuss at the next meeting once you have a chance to digest this information. It's going to be a lot of traffic volume scenarios to kind of digest. So I'll say that there could be the opportunity to kind of do a follow-up if necessary. And I'll hand it off to Jeff to kind of run through the slides here. And Jeff, let me know if you want me to share the screen here, or if you have them ready to share.
I could share. Let me see. Let me know if you can see that.
Looks good to me.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Mike and committee. Yeah, so we were asked to evaluate kind of trade-offs, right? If work on complete streets for Pleasant Street Sparks Ave and Williams Lane, and trade-offs if we provided or repurposed streets to go one lane and repurposed as either bicycle or pedestrian or shared use. What would some of the impacts be in terms of traffic volumes and capacity on intersections? So that's what we have here. I've got several slides. So the next slide is going to be just the study area. And you're going to see this as the base map for all the volume shifting that we present, but basically focused on Sparks Ave, Pleasant Street, Williams, as most of the volumes that get shifted around are on that base area. So we identified actually 7 alternatives and I compared against the existing conditions. So any changes that we show are against existing volume operation conditions. And you don't have to remember all these. This would be on each slide, but alternative one is Pleasant Street, one-way northbound between Williams Lane and Five Corners. Alternative 2 was Pleasant Street, one-way northbound, the entire length. We actually removed that for consideration. We didn't seem to have a lot of utility. Alternative 3 was Williams Lane, one-way westbound. 4 is Williams Lane, one-way eastbound. And 5, 6, and 7, we start combining those alternatives from above. So 5 is Williams Lane, one-way eastbound with Pleasant Street, one-way northbound for the entire length in the study area. 6 is eastbound Williams Lane with Pleasant Street, one-way northbound from Williams Lane to Five Corners. And then 7 is similar, except Williams Lane is one-way westbound. So those are the alternatives that we evaluated. And I'll just say that these, when we look at these alternatives, we're looking at converting some of the street segments from two-way to one-way. So whenever we do that, we're really reducing capacity. So the traffic has to be shifted, somewhere, and that's kind of the focus of our analysis. And just the approach is we're going to show AM peak hour analysis. We have PM peak hour, but AM peak hour was probably had some higher volumes in some location, but PM is similar. Traffic volumes, shifting are based on circulation patterns and count data. And we don't have perfect data. We have different counts from different years, even some of it's pre-COVID. So, we're basing it on the best, information that we have. It's not a perfect science. We're looking at kind of major shifts in volumes. There's probably shifting that's occurring in every street in the area, but we weren't really worried about small shifts in traffic volumes, like 25 vehicles or so. So most of the volumes you see are going to be the larger, have some more of an impact. So we calculated and summarized those volumes and percent change, and we performed intersection capacity analysis at those five intersections you see there in the study area from Five Corners to the roundabout. And I'd like just to go through these. There's a lot of numbers. I'm not going to, spend a lot of time on every single number, but maybe just highlight the kind of the focus of each one of these. So this first one is alternative 1, Pleasant Street, one-way northbound from Williams Lane to Five Corners. So one-way northbound travel, or eliminating the southbound travel here on Pleasant Street. So most of the shifting, like I said, we're not going to not showing a lot over here into Orange Street. There'll probably be some, but probably more so on Atlantic Ave, Sparks Ave. You're going to see this kind of pattern a lot in several of the alternatives, where we're eliminating the southbound and 250 vehicles in a peak hour. You get shift over to this side in Atlantic and to Sparks, and on the short one here, the triangle, the other shift back to Williams Lane, or they continue down Sparks. So not 250. I'll show you the results of the capacity analysis. That really does have an impact on kind of this, the four corners intersection here of Sparks, Surfside, Atlantic, and Prospect. So most of the impacts there are limited to Atlantic, small portion of Sparks and Williams Lane in this one. So 2 is just Williams Lane, one way westbound. So eliminate the eastbound traffic. This was a kind of a current volume, so there's really not that much traffic in the peak hour, 50 vehicles. So this one doesn't have really a significant impact. Any of the movements of traffic volumes here are, 50 vehicles or less in a peak hour. So this one probably has the least impacts of any of the alternatives in terms of volume shifts in the study area. So nothing really significant in this case. So 4 is the opposite. We go from we were westbound before, now it's one-way eastbound, so we prohibit westbound traffic. So Williams has 130 vehicles in the AM peak hour in this direction. So a little more of an impact, but not much, probably, more moderate traffic volumes. We have some on Sparks Avenue northbound, still less than 100, and a little, a fewer on Pleasant Street northbound. So a little more impacts, but really not, not that much, probably manageable, something like that. So alternative 5, 6, and 7 was where we start combining those separate elements, and we have a lot going on and a lot of changes going on. Again, we still, and this is one way northbound all the way, kind of in our study area on Pleasant Street. So again, we have kind of 250 shifted over from Pleasant to Atlantic Ave and continuing, down Sparks Avenue, all the way to the roundabout. We have some traffic volume added on a lot of segments on Sparks Avenue northbound, a little bit on, on Pleasant Street, some on Orange in this case. So there's a lot of changes, but the highest volumes again are kind of this corridor, this Atlantic Ave, Williams Lane, Sparks Avenue. We're adding those traffic volumes. 6 is one way Williams in the eastbound direction, like we showed before, and one way Pleasant Street northbound in this segment up to 5 corners. So this kind of triangular area. Again, the shift on Atlantic Avenue, about 250 vehicles. We have more on Williams in this case for short section, but it is a right turn. We have about 90 vehicles northbound on Sparks, fewer vehicles on Pleasant Street northbound. So you got a kind of a combination of things, but mostly limited to this, the triangle area of Atlantic, Pleasant, and Williams, and piece of Sparks. And 7 is the same as 6, except we changed direction of the Williams Lane. Similar type of changes, except the volumes are a little heavier added on to Sparks traveling southbound, and there are some impacts here to Sanford in this case. For vehicles, there's not really a cutover on Williams Lane until you get to Sanford, so the volumes that were shifted on Atlantic here continue further down to Sanford and continue on. So those are kind of the individual magnitudes of shifts. We rounded numbers here, so we're not getting down to like individual vehicles. So we either rounded to 5 or 10 for magnitudes of volume shifts. So then we looked at this, a few different ways. And Mike, if you have any comments, feel free to jump in on this. But this was an evaluation matrix I think we had before, kind of in a rough form. So we kind of quantified some of this based on some of the findings. And this first page is Pleasant Street. And here the criteria across the top, traffic impacts, right-of-way impacts, bicycle, pedestrian accommodations, and cost. And this first segment is Pleasant Street. It's that shorter, the northern section, 5 corners to Williams. And the way to look at this is anything in red is more of a significant impact, a negative impact. Darker green is more of a significant benefit, and the light green is kind of a smaller benefit. And anything not shaded is more or less no major change. But So Pleasant Street traffic, yeah, I talked about the four corners traffic shift. So the intersection already operates at a failure level service F with high volumes. So this would exacerbate that delay. LOSF is as low it goes, but it gets to be a worse F, and that's for alternatives 1, 5, 6, and 7. This is for the one-way option. The two-way option really doesn't have any impacts. Right away, yeah, there's with the two one-way we don't have that, but the two-way we have some sidewalk, private property, and utility issues. Bicycle and pet issues, they're all pretty good. It's generally benefits, depending, regardless if you're one or two way. And there's some cost implications with the utility poles, utility vaults. So this next section is William Street down to Sparks, and this is just alternative 5. It's the only one we evaluated. Same corner, same issue at 5 corners, exacerbate poor performance at 4 corners. And then this one, since we do have the one-way, it does reduce kind of vehicle circulation and access, and some side street impacts. We do have some right-of-way issues due to angled parking, in this particular from Dave Street to West Creek Road, for both one-way and two-way. Bicycles generally good, although we indicated that bicycles traveling adjacent to angled or parallel parking, there is some impact there. And then same thing, some construction cost here with utilities. And the next slide is Williams Lane. Not as many impacts. There are some impacts with traffic around Atlantic Ave, as we showed. Right away, in Williams Lane for a sidewalk, we probably need some property utility relocation. Again, mostly benefits on the bicycle pedestrian side, although if we go with a share the road facility, it's less of a facility than a dedicated bike lane or shared use path. And then there's again some utility or right of way cost with the two-way here. So that's one way of looking at that criteria. The other way is I don't expect you to be able to see a lot of these volume shifts, but the colors show the green color shows we're adding traffic to roadway segments of greater than 90 vehicles in the morning peak hour. Yellow is where we're reducing traffic volumes greater than 90. So, alternative 1 was just the case. We were, one way on Pleasant Street, northbound between Williams Lane and 5 Corners. It's mostly that shifting that 250 from the southbound to Atlantic Avenue, and then to Williams. 3 doesn't have any major, like I said, those are small volumes, really nothing to speak of. 4 has a little bit of the 90 range here. And then 5, 6, and 5 has the most shifting because it's the most extensive circulation of one-way streets. It's the longest, so you're going to have the most impacts, adding and subtracting traffic. A little less for 6 and a little less for 7, but those because they have the combination of one-way Pleasant and one-way Williams are going to have the greater impacts on traffic shifting. And then the capacity analysis results. This is a level of service we performed for each of those 5 intersections. At 5 Corners, there's really not much of a change because we're just kind of changing the volumes at the intersection from a through lane to a turn lane. So actually it doesn't do that much. As I mentioned, at the 4 Corners at Sparks and Atlantic, this is where we have issues. Alternative 1, where you could see, okay, overall delay is 137, then 224 for alternative 1, 5, 6, and 7. So we are increasing delay quite a bit. We're not showing queue length, but queue length would increase at this intersection. That has most of the impact for, all the alternatives, except when we just do Williams Street in one direction or another. And then Sparks at Williams, this is where we add a lot of left turns and opposing the turn from Williams Lane that does go from the level service D to F. Most of these greens are positive because we're really eliminating the movement. So if we have, one way, one direction on Williams Lane, if you eliminate that approach, you're not going to have any delay. So yeah, it goes from D to A. It's because you don't have that volume or conflict in that case. So, but in terms of the other intersections, there's not a lot of impacts, but it is focusing on that corridor, Atlantic, Sparks, and Williams, kind of particularly in the the southbound direction.
Jeff, we have to wrap this up here at 5.
Yeah, that's a quick summary. So yeah.
Okay. Mike, was there anything else that you wanted? You looking for a recommendation from us? I mean, we lost Ian, we lost RJ.
I didn't know that RJ was off. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it looks like we just lost a quorum.
Yeah, that
So
happened
we will
right at 5. Yeah.
Okay, so apologies for running a little long there. What we can do is hold this over. Jeff did his presentation for you to kind of maybe digest it and maybe introduce these evaluation matrices. We will seek some guidance or recommendation from this committee and then take it to other committees and boards to consider. In a nutshell, Four Corners is the intersection that's going to be impacted. If you want to accommodate bicyclists along Pleasant Street, that's really the big takeaway and the trade-off. If bicyclists aren't as well accommodated, they'll likely be overburdening the sidewalk that would go in. It's intended to improve pedestrian circulation, so that's just something to juggle. I know we're getting late in the meeting hour, so I'll leave it at that and say we can bring this back for the next meeting if you think that that's acceptable.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
Well, we don't have to make a motion to adjourn, so.
No, I appreciate the time, Mr. Chair, and I'll be in coordination with you and Ian about scheduling the next meeting. And I want to thank John, Michelle, Jeff, Matt Fee, and Alexis from Mass Bike from hanging in there.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jeff, for the presentation. There's a lot of great work. And I read it and then listened, and now I got to go back and digest it again.
I know there's a lot there. So.
And Mr. Chair, if it's all right, I know Alexis had some information you want to share, just promotional items. If it's okay,
Sure.
I'll just forward that via email to you all. And just so that it helps spread the word. And Alexis, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say just briefly on that, but.
Nope, there's just 2 events coming up. Mass Bike Lights Brigade, which we do every fall. Last year we gave away like 3,000 lights. And yeah, everything's in the document. And then there's National Day of Remembrance coming up in November, which addresses what we were just talking about with accident violence, road violence, victims of road violence. Which I think
It's in November.
November 19th. It's an international event, and Mass Bike puts on activities.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would say this brigade type of event, we had one of these in Houston. It is wild. I haven't been to the Massachusetts one, but if they want to do one in Nantucket, it's pretty exciting. I'll leave it at that.
I think it'd be great.
Yep.
Thank you all. Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.